From deciding that getting blind drunk for a once-in-a-lifetime meeting with a legendary director was the wisest call on the day, to oddly not being able to make eye contact mid-audition due to their time immersed in another well-known character's world. These actors all wound up on the outside looking in for a number of massive movies due to what can best be described as particularly odd reasons. I'm Gareth from WhatCulture.com, and here are the 10 strangest reasons that actors lost out on huge movie roles. Number 10. Seth Rogen and Jason Segel couldn't take themselves seriously as rappers. 8 Mile. Years before Seth Rogen became Hollywood's go-to guy for just about any slice of blockbuster comedy, the now legendary chuckler was in the running for a part in 2002's 8 Mile alongside close mate Jason Segel. And with both actors weirdly being told to bring someone along to read with them for said cheddar audition, the Freaks and Geeks co-stars opted to back each other up for their individual meetings for the role. Anyone who has ever found themselves trying to deliver a class project with a pal likely knows where this one was heading. And sure enough, what followed was a pretty embarrassing read from both comedy talents for the Detroit rapper character. As Rogen put it in his book titled Yearbook, it quickly became obvious that the part was one we could not have been less right for, with both actors laughing hysterically at their delivery of lines such as "Yo yo mother effer, it's cheddar, what up B?" Rogen and Segel ultimately admitted defeat before they'd even reached the end of their material, as the former noted how the whole thing was so silly we couldn't finish. Unsurprisingly, neither star made the cheddar cut in the end. Number 9. Chris Evans' need to show off range blows up in his face. Observe and report. Despite Seth Rogen very much understanding the feeling of utterly bombing an audition for what could potentially be a huge upcoming feature, that still couldn't save eventual Captain America Chris Evans from feeling a touch overwhelmed during his meeting in front of the Pineapple Express star and the producer and director of 2009's Observe and Report. With the star desperate to show another layer of himself on the back of appearing in the likes of the Fantastic Four series, Evans eventually found himself being overcome by a wave of sweat and his face went red. Then, after asking for a moment to compose himself in the hall, the same thing only went and happened again. Determined not to blow this golden opportunity to stretch himself as an actor though, Evans begged his agent to schedule another audition in front of the gang a few days later. But this most definitely was not a case of third time's the charm, as Evans once again drowned in his own sweat and changed colour before finally uttering a defeated, "Guys, I'm so sorry, I'm just gonna go." It all worked out in the end though, eh? Number 8. George Clooney got bladdered for his audition, Bram Stoker's Dracula. In a bid to kill two birds with one stone, so to speak, George Clooney decided that he'd experiment a touch in the lead-up to his all-important audition for Bram Stoker's Dracula many moons ago. With the eventual Hollywood heartthrob in the running for the character of a drunk in Francis Ford Coppola's incoming bout of blood-sucking, Clooney thought it wise to legitimately get hammered before his meeting with the legendary director. And as the future icon of the business would hilariously recall, things didn't exactly go to plan from there on out. As he put it, "I remember I was very bad at auditioning. I went to audition for Francis Ford Coppola to play a drunk in Dracula. I thought it would be a good idea if I were to get drunk for the audition to get the part." Afterwards, Coppola phoned the agent and told him, "Hey, Clooney was drunk," so that didn't work out. Simply put, Coppola felt this bladdered up-and-comer's questionable methods truly sucked. Thank you. Number 7. Mark Strong blew his Bond audition after a heavy night on the town with a future Bond, James Bond. Mark Strong also learned the hard way that enjoying a bevy too many in the hours leading up to a meeting can often have disastrous consequences. Coming during the 90s era that saw Pierce Brosnan sporting the iconic suit of 007, the future Kingsman and Sherlock Holmes star was so overjoyed about pulling off the feat of actually learning his lines for the upcoming audition for a villainous James Bond role that he went out for a drink and he got pissed. As the Brit would recall via The Hollywood Reporter though, "I overdid it and the next day I was severely hungover." Instead of requesting another date for his vital audition, Strong eventually gritted his teeth and attempted to get through the meeting whilst nursing a no doubt dreadful head, adding, "I started, then I just forgot my lines. Couldn't remember what they were, and they all just kind of fell apart. I was sweating, it was a terrible experience, but I really learned from it." Adding insult to injury, however, was the fact that the person the actor was partying with the night before only turned out to be the next Bond himself, Daniel Bloody Craig, with Strong defiantly declaring, "I blame him." License to spill, more like. Number 6. Ryan Gosling got too fat for Peter Jackson, The Lovely Bones. In the wake of the larger-than-life successes that were his The Lord of the Rings and King Kong big screen adaptations, every actor under the sun was quite rightly lining up to be a part of whatever Peter Jackson was cooking up next. Said next cinematic offering ultimately ended up being 2009's The Lovely Bones, a film that Ryan Gosling clearly put his heart, soul, and stomach into during the months leading up to the project shoot. Only instead of discussing with his director whether piling the pounds on for the role of grieving father Jack Salmon was the right move for the movie, Gosling soon found out the hard way that Jackson had other ideas for the character. Despite putting away gallons of melting Häagen-Dazs ice cream and adding on 60 pounds for the part, Gosling would later recall to The Hollywood Reporter, "It was a huge movie and there's so many things to deal with and he couldn't deal with the actors individually. I just showed up on set and I had gotten it wrong. Then I was fat and unemployed." Go figure. Number 5. Charlize Theron wasn't Rob Marshall's Roxy, Chicago. Another star who actually at one point had a huge movie role in their hands, before eventually having it torn away in next to no time. Charlize Theron was once very much preparing herself for the character of a lifetime, as 2002's big screen adaptation of Chicago looked to be picking up steam. However, the second Theron's original director was swapped out for Rob Marshall, things started to unravel for the future Oscar winner, with the South African-American sensation explaining to Howard Stern on his Sirius XM radio show that "I was a dancer for most of my life, and there was a real nostalgia that came with the idea of making said jazzy flick." Theron would ultimately note how she was really bummed when this new director got brought on and he didn't want to make the movie with me. In the end, through no fault of Theron's own, Marshall suddenly called a Roxy Hart audible and brought Renee Zellweger in for the iconic part instead. A move that had clearly deflated Theron still couldn't help but praise admittedly, stating that "I'm fully envious of what she did, I've seen that movie a lot." Number 4. A 28-year-old Olivia Wilde was too old for Scorsese, The Wolf of Wall Street. The reason given to Olivia Wilde for being passed over for the part of Naomi LaPaglia, eventually played by Margot Robbie in Martin Scorsese's The Wolf of Wall Street, is as baffling as it must have been frustrating for the actor at the time. After first being told that she was unfortunately deemed too sophisticated for the part, Wilde soon discovered that what Scorsese and the gang actually meant was that the 28-year-old was too old to start opposite Leonardo DiCaprio on this particular occasion. And as the eventual book-smart director would note with a chuckle to Howard Stern on his Sirius XM radio show, in the recounting of this odd reasoning for rejecting the hardly over-the-hill star, "I want to make a translation sheet for Hollywood that's like all the feedback your agents give you and what it really means." All that being said, Wilde would also admit that when she did finally watch Wolf, she fully understood Robbie's perfect casting, and her impressive Wall Street audition ultimately resulted in her being offered her part in the Scorsese-produced Vinyl HBO series without an audition too. Every cloud and all that. Number 3. Zoe Kravitz was too urban for an audition, The Dark Knight Rises. There was actually a moment in time when the mesmerizing Zoe Kravitz couldn't even get seen for a role in a Batman flick, believe it or not. A decade before Matt Reeves decided to hand the keys to the Cat Kingdom to Kravitz, the actor was trying to get her paws on a small role in Christopher Nolan's corner of the Batverse, in the lead up to the director's epic trilogy concluding The Dark Knight Rises. Instead of being presented with the opportunity to prove her worth in front of Nolan and the film's casting directors, however, Kravitz would later recall being told that they were not going urban on the part. Rather depressingly, Kravitz would shed further light on the topic via her Instagram story, stating that "This is something I heard a lot 10 years ago, it was a very different time. The fact the soon-to-be Catwoman, as she put it, wasn't able to read because of the colour of my skin is about as shameful as it gets." But at least Kravitz got the last laugh whilst donning her critically acclaimed claws in The Batman. Number 2. Tom Holland kept giggling at a casting droid. Episode 7, The Force Awakens. You can only imagine how much pressure must have been on the chosen few who managed to make it into the final casting stages for Episode 7's next batch of leading roles all those years ago. In the case of none other than future Spider-Man himself, Tom Holland, though, said pressure wasn't actually the issue. As it goes, the Brit struggled more with the concept of keeping a straight face in the utterly bizarre casting environment than he did managing his nerves. As the MCU star would reveal in a Hot Ones interview, during one of his meetings for the part of Finn in the franchise, Holland was caught completely off guard by a member of the casting team genuinely committing to the droid lines of beep beep boop 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 in the audition script. So much so that the actor simply could not contain his giggles, eventually admitting, "You know when you realise you've got something so wrong, I just couldn't stop laughing." Yet despite completely fumbling said Force-sensitive audition, Holland would still humbly concede, "I don't think that's the reason why I didn't get the role. I think John Boyega was just better for the role than me." Whatever way you slice it though, laughing your head off at a casting director robot droid impersonator probably wasn't the best shout. Number 1. Charlie Cox couldn't shake his daredevil blindness. Solo: A Star Wars Story. MCU star Charlie Cox's time as part of Marvel's Underworld ultimately did him little favors in his quest to become an iconic smuggler. Though he wasn't outright told as much, Cox could sense pretty early on into a super secretive audition that he was reading for none other than the part of a young Han Solo in his own spin-off Star Wars story. Unfortunately for the Daredevil actor though, his years of playing a blind character came back to haunt him mid-read-through. As he'd recalled to The Hollywood Reporter, halfway through it the casting director stopped me and said, "Why aren't you looking at me?" I realised I had gotten into the habit of not making eye contact, because the only thing I had done for 2 years is play someone who is blind. I never got invited back, probably because they couldn't figure out why I was acting like a complete idiot. Thankfully, Kevin Feige was fairly fond of this particular idiot, and was all too happy to invite him back to his balmy corner of the multiverse recently instead.